Welcome to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life, with psychologist and author of over 75 books, Dr. Barry Weinhold.
Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life with Dr. Barry Weinhold. My name is Ashley. Dr. Weinhold, how are you today?
Well, I'm much better today. I've gotten some fishing done, and I can hardly wait to get back.
I bet. It's always hard to come back from vacation when you have such a wonderful time.
I got the fever.
Well, hopefully there's plenty of fly fishing left for you.
Oh yeah,
this year.
I left them all behind. I'm a catch and release fisherman.
Gotcha.
So it's just the sport of it that draws me, and there's nothing more thrilling for me than to throw a fly out there with my fly rod and laying on the surface of the water and find this fish come up out of the deep and grab it and take it down. that's the thrill of fly fishing for me.
Now, is that something you often do with other people? We don't have fly fishing where I live, so.
Yeah. I have a friend, and I taught her how to fly fish this time.
Nice.
And she'll never go back to bait fishing again.
It does seem more eventful, or at least more interactive.
Yeah, it is.
Than bait fishing.
It is, and I don't know. There's just something about the place I go is so beautiful. I don't even care much about how many fish I catch.
Yeah.
Just being out in nature in a beautiful spot. And when I get out in nature, I get very quiet. I don't like to talk a lot. So
that is the best part of fishing. I'm not really a fisher myself, but my husband is, and I do enjoy at least going on the boat. I'll bring a book or something, and it's just nice to be on the lake. Not with kids anymore. We can't do that with kids. They don't have the attention span for 8 hours of fishing. But
but maybe at some point, I want to go with Dad, go fishing.
Yeah, once in a while, if they're doing a short trip out, they'll take our oldest, and it's kind of a fun. He'll go with his father, so 3 generations, and they get out there and kind of bond. It's good for them to have that time.
So I did that with my son. Took him fishing very early on. He caught on and far surpassed me. He's now a first-class fly fisherman. Ties his own flies, makes nets.
Oh,
to catch fish.
Sure.
I mean, he's really into the sport of it.
Yeah, that's always nice. It's really fun to see how things get passed down like that. It's a tradition.
He was the one who taught me to fly fish.
Oh.
Because I was a bait fisherman, and when we'd go fishing, he'd always catch more fish than I would with his flies. I said, "You got to teach me how to do that," and he did.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a reverse tradition, but it's still a tradition, just the same. That's great. So, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I want to dig deeper into why boys become mass shooters, and 98% of them are males. So it's like, what is it about the way we raise boys, or the way we should raise boys, that we don't, that's leading to these young men often, although sometimes it's older, who I think they're obviously in the past. For example, the last episode we talked about the latchkey kid, and Ryan wrote a song about the shooter from Las Vegas who he envisioned must have been a latchkey kid, a real loner in life. and he probably was. That's one of the characteristics. But I want to kind of outline what research has shown, or kind of well, I have 9 early warnings behaviors to pay attention to, and so there's what research has shown, that these mass shooters don't just kind of uh, just randomly uh, uh, decide to shoot people. They prepare, they plan, and they do research. And in that planning, research, and preparation, they often involve other people. So people, if they understand what they're actually planning, can possibly stop them. And many times they don't. They have many times they have websites where they have a lot of hate messages on them, and people read them and say, "Oh, that's isn't that weird?" But they don't do anything about it. So what happens is their identity becomes embedded in aggressive behaviors. They have fantasies about acting violent towards others. They tend to um, obsess about getting even and getting revenge. So in many cases, they feel like victims of something or someone. And they have these fantasies that they're going to get even by taking a gun and shooting a bunch of people. So, 3, they have an increased pathological preoccupation with a person or a cause that's violent. So on their websites, they frequently will have references or articles by violent people, or people who promote violent behavior as a way of solving problems. And so that's another place where they could be spotted, as they have a website with a lot of stories and information about other famous violent people. And they have this kind of psychological desire to become a pseudo commando, and they have what I call a warrior mentality. And they start to closely associate that with weapons or other military or law enforcement paraphernalia, or identify with other violent people, like in number 3. They start to really show a really drastic move towards being very military or militaristic, um, and often then will have weapons. They often have weapons they show on their websites, and many of those they buy legally, um, and that's why we have to close some of the loopholes against buying weapons of war, because what they buy are usually AR-15s or other semi-automatic or automatic weapons. So they commit an act of violence that appears unrelated to any targeted violence or pathway behavior earlier in life. And one of the things that is typical of some of these shooters is they're violent towards animals. They kill cats, or they treat animals with a great deal of violence and abuse. Uh, and of course, they see the animal as being less powerful than they are, and they exercising their power over the animal. So there's often a history of some kind of violent behavior towards animals earlier on in their life, and that's an early warning signal. And they display an increase in the frequency or variety of any noted activities related to the target. They'll start visiting the target, like the guy that shot up the store in Buffalo. He visited that place many times and scouted it out, knew where everything was, and so that's a common kind of planning behavior. As I said up in number 1, they do a lot of research and planning, and part of that is often uh, frequently visiting the area that they or the place they're going to target, and getting as much information about the normal behavior of people in that place. Uh, they also often tell a third party what they intend to do, and the third parties often don't say anything. So there's again where they they frequently don't, although there may be loners, they still other kind of fellow travelers. They will let them know that they're what they're about to do and warning. I was part of heading off an attack from a mother called me and said my son is threatening to shoot up the school. I said, well, for heaven's sakes, get all weapons in that house out of his reach. And so there was a pistol. She found a pistol in his bedroom, and she took it and gave it to a friend to keep in a safe away from him. So I mean, uh, he was actually saying what he was going to do ahead of it. And there's evidence of violent action time imperative. There's an urge to become violent, which kind of builds inside of these people, and they don't know how to control their emotions. They don't know how to regulate their emotions, and so they get caught in this downward spiral of negative emotions of anger and rage and fear and and then that leads them to at some point want to act that out. And then they communicate a direct threat to the target or to law enforcement even before the target. I mean, sometimes they'll send an email to the police department saying, I'm going to shoot up the supermarket at First and Main or wherever it is. And so it's important to notice, and some of these threats people laugh off. I never would laugh off a threat like that if I heard it. And I think more and more people are not laughing it off. So those are 9 early warning behaviors of mass shooters that if we were aware of those behaviors, perhaps we could stop them. And in Colorado and in many other states, we have red flag laws where people who are known to be violent are not allowed to buy a gun. There's a process you got to go through to have a judge declare this person not be allowed to buy any weapons, guns, knives, or anything. Unfortunately, the red flag laws in Colorado and elsewhere aren't universally enforced. I think we need a national red flag law that would do better to really give people a sense of protection, a sense of safety. And there's also a bill that passed and is now up for review before the Supreme Court about people who have a history of domestic violence not be allowed to buy a gun. And that sort of comes under the red flag act, although you don't have to declare that they're mentally ill, they just have a history of violence. And I think that'd be important too to provide more safety because a lot of women, unfortunately, get killed by either their ex-husbands or soon-to-be ex-husbands because they they don't want to put up anymore with the abuse they're getting. And I had to defend a woman who was a client of mine. She was abused by her boyfriend repeatedly, and one day she called me and she said, I put all his stuff out in the backyards and doused it in gasoline and set it on fire, and I have a firearm. If he comes home, I don't know what I'll do. And I'm talking on the phone, and she said, "Oh, he just walked in. What do I do?" Nothing I could do. She did shoot him. She didn't kill him. She wounded him pretty badly. So I was a witness at her trial about the abuse that led up to her doing this act of violence against her boyfriend. She did get prison time, but I don't think she got as much because of my testimony and other testimonies about this was the first time this had ever happened, and basically she had some grounds. I wouldn't have advised that as a method of solving conflicts, but she was backed up against the wall and didn't know any other way handle it. So that's what I wanted to say about the warning behaviors. And then I know that mass shooters, almost every one of them, had a pretty horrendous childhood, and so they had many experiences as a child that I think have some bearing on why they ended up committing mass murders. So I want to talk about that next, about what are the kind of common life experiences that growing up that boys particularly have that might be linked to their propensity to use violence to resolve their conflicts. Uh, and what the first on the list is that most of uh, the, uh, the mass shooters lack a secure bonding and attachment with their mothers. And what they really have become are what are called sometimes isolated children or lost children. They withdraw from the bonding after a while because they don't trust that the bonding is ever going to come back in a way that would be helpful to them, and so they basically develop an avoidant bonding and attachment style, and are sometimes called lost children or isolated children, or loners is another term that's often used for mass shooters. And that's in Ryan's story and song about the shooter in Las Vegas portrayed him as a latchkey kid who turned out to be a loner, and that's probably pretty accurate. Um, their needs were, I see I have some typos on here, their needs were neglected. Uh, and it's interesting that uh, neglect has a more lasting effect on people than does abuse. First of all, it's harder to identify because nothing happened. And so they have to begin to understand what should have happened that didn't happen. And frequently they don't. And so the long-term effects of neglect are much more powerful in the lives of adults that had their needs neglected as a child. And needs for self-esteem, needs for uh, uh, well, even needs to have appropriate limits set. Frequently, these infants, as number 8 indicates, they had also a lot of abuse as a child, an infant or a toddler. That the way their parents treated them was to try to control them through either physical punishment or shame. And many of them have, at their core, they're very shame-based people. And they, because that's what they grew up with, they were told they were no good and they were shamed for lots of things that they did. So the other thing that is pretty much clear in the literature is that many of these mass shooters either didn't have a father or they had uh, a father who wasn't emotionally present and couldn't even relate to him. I mean, obviously, Andres had a father who was really tuned into him and knew how to build the confidence in Andres until he became able to be an adult. And that's the kind of father that most of us wish we had had, but didn't. Even though he was still, his father was still caught in the traditions of his culture and how you raise kids. He did do some things right. And Andrews sees that in his father, that he did provide opportunities for him to have rites of passage into adulthood. And his father was the one who provided that. 7, they blame others for their unhappiness. This is very common in almost all the mass shooters, is that they have a probably feeling a lot of internal conflict and internal uh, chaos, perhaps. But they also then very often will blame whatever they're feeling and how their life circumstance is evolving as a fault of somebody else. And mean, some of them never get through that, and you can't really become emotionally separate from somebody by just blaming it on them. And so many of these people are not emotionally separate from their parents. They're still little boys and little girls, mostly little boys, who are unhappy and they don't know why. And that leads me to the last one is most of them don't understand their personal psychology. They don't understand why they think the way they do, why they feel the way they do, and why they do act the way they do. And that lack of understanding leads to often very drastic measures like taking up an automatic weapon and shooting up some crowd somewhere. And it's sad. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I think we should be teaching more about that in schools, about why we do what we do, why we feel the way we do. And my latest book, which I'll be talking about next time a lot, is all about that to help people build what I call more psychological intelligence, become more intelligent, more understanding of their own personal psychology, and then how to be identify it, and then how to change it. And so in the book, I also recommend that people with this kind of knowledge can be their own therapists. You don't need to have therapy from somebody else. Although I think it helps. It helped me. I didn't do this all by myself. I did it with the help of therapists. Uh, and Yet there are people who are therapy phobic, and maybe this book will help them get over that, and they'll see as they begin to understand why they do things and why they feel the way they do, that they'll be more open to going to a therapist to get some help on how to change that. Because that's the biggest problem is once you're aware of it, how do you change it? And I have in the book a lot of suggestions on how to do that. But if you don't want to do it yourself, then you might decide to get a therapist to help you with that process. So those are things from the research that have been shown to be the life experiences of mass shooters. And I do think until we put more of our resources in helping parents do a better job in the first 3 years of life, we're going to still continue to have more of this. We'll have more people who are potential mass shooters. And
Definitely.
interestingly enough, when we talk about all of these mass shooters have mental illnesses, if you look at them and examine their behaviors, actually, they maybe don't even qualify for a diagnosis. Yet they do have mental problems, but not to the extent where they would get a diagnosis for them. But they still are dangers to themselves and other people. So we can understand why they do what they do, and also having some better understanding of the early warning signals of people that are inclined this way will help maybe reduce that number of mass shooters that we have. But until we really do a better job of supporting families and parents, we're only just putting our thumb in the dike. It's not a final solution at all, but it is at least a step in the right direction. So all the other things like increasing background checks, banning weapons of war, and other things I think would extremely help, and maybe placing an age on when you have to be, how old you have to be before you can buy a gun. Some states are now using 21 as the age for buying a gun.
Interesting.
It'd be more that by 21 they'd be more mature. Well, that theoretically might be true, but if all these potential mass shooters had these other things happen to them and they've not done anything about it,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how old they are.
Nope. Maybe a test of their PsyQ.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So
thank you so much.
that's what I have to say about the whole problem of mass shooters, and it's certainly on the increase. It hasn't slowed down. And, in fact, it's gotten so commonplace that they don't even report it on CNN anymore.
Mm-mm.
5 people died in Dallas over the last weekend. Or was it this weekend? I don't know. I read it in the paper this morning. I don't know when it was, but I didn't know about it. Nothing was ever in the paper about it. And every day on the streets of Chicago, people are killed. We don't hear about that.
No.
So we're sort of isolated in some way from the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a serious problem.
I think also coming from a rural area, we see even less of that, and so it's easy to think and believe that it doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah, because you don't
Because
see
of
it.
that.
You don't see it.
Nope. It's easy to convince people that it doesn't exist
Yeah.
because of that. So yeah, always good to stay informed, and I really think it goes back to the parent. It's just, I don't think anybody should take being a parent lightly. It is the most important job you'll ever have in your whole life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
It really is.
the countries where they understand that and give support to parents and young parents with young children, it pays huge dividends long term.
Yep.
And fewer tax dollars have to go to treatment of problems. If we can use some of that money to prevent the problems,
Preventative.
Parents the support they need.
Yes.
I mean, so many parents now, working mothers are working. They get treatment. They can afford to stay home maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8. Well, maybe, and some can't even that.
No.
Then they have to turn their baby over to somebody else.
Yep.
And that's not good for either the mother or the baby.
No.
But they're stuck with it, and it's a terrible. It's almost, it reminds me of Sophie's Choice, the movie. And
it's there's a lot of choices you make at least I know as a mom, where it feels like you really don't have a choice.
You don't have very many options at all.
No. Or you're forced to make a choice between the least worst of two things.
That's too bad. I mean, we know better. We can do better than this. And that's what I'm trying to get across to people, is that don't be satisfied and settle for less.
Nope.
Keep fighting for more. And we all have to do that. We have to, and we have made progress. I mean, I looked at the history of childhood. I've read a book once on that, back in the 17, 16, 15, on up to present time. Children really were more abused then, and more without any kind of recourse to do anything about it. So we're making progress, but we got a ways to go yet.
Definitely. And I think it's time we look to the positive examples that are already working. Stop doing things backwards just because that's the way they've been done.
Yeah.
So
okay, well,
thank you so much.
I'll see you next week, and we'll dig into more about what the book can do to help people learn more about their psychological, their personal psychology through raising their PsyQ.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Weinhold.
All right. Thank you, Ashley.
Bye-bye.
For more information, please visit the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership at CICRCL.org or click the link in the show notes.